How long do we think this is going to be a game between Tennessee and NC State on Saturday? I think if Tennessee's assignment sound, this game should at least be over by the early third quarter. But I think the true difference maker in this game is going to be the depth of Tennessee's wide receiving core. I'm Paige Dower. This is the Field Pass. There's one stat line that I think is maybe more impressive than others, or is at least more telling than others for what we could expect to see from Tennessee's offense this season. It starts, of course, with Nico Iamaleava. He was able to target 8 different receivers. 7 of them hauled in a catch. And I say quote because running back Dylan Sampson and tight end Ethan Davis were responsible for being 2 of those receivers for Tennessee. But I just think it shows the ability for Nico and the offense to really spread the wealth, get a number of guys involved in the passing game. But I think 4 of those receivers will really continue to cause damage and be lethal this season. One of those 4 receivers I think will be a problem for NC State is Dante Thornton, who had a heck of a game in the opening week for his 2024 campaign. He took 3 targets for 3 receptions, a perfect 3 of 3 on the day for 105 yards. He seldom had a stat line like that a year ago, and I think the biggest difference is because he's no longer an inside receiver. He is now in the outside, and that is where his talent lies. And I think the disconnect a year ago was that he wasn't primarily playing where his strength was. So when you come into the season and the coaches are talking about the freak athlete that they expect you to be, and you're primed to be, this physical receiver, and we don't really see much of that. I think the disconnect is because he wasn't playing, where his skills are. We saw that translate in, week 1, taking those 3 receptions for a pair of touchdowns and 105 yards. 2 of those catches are also what you would call explosive plays, going more than 15 yards. One 29, another 59. And I think a lot of that also has to do with the confidence that he's been able to build, throughout the offseason, because he did go through the offseason injured. He had a similar injury that Bru McCoy had, and the 2 of them really relied on each other during the recovery process. And I think a lot of that translated into Dante Thornton having a lot more mental toughness, because a year ago he really checked himself out of the game mentally when he wasn't producing at a level that he knew he could. Then we see that immediately translated into week 1. He was finally able to exercise what he's been practicing all off season. And of course, that getting the attention of wide receivers coach Kelsey Pope, who was just simply impressed with the level of growth that he's been able to make since the off season.
One early, which led to another. He got off to a hot start, which was awesome for him and really for our group to be able to see that, because they feed off one another. But like we talked about last time, his biggest deal is just staying positive, regardless if it's good or bad things happening.
Efficiency continues where he really is, hauling in most of his targets. I think that is a really encouraging sign for what he could do for the rest of the season. Another guy that we're excited to have back is, of course, number 5, Bru McCoy, who in his first game back since his season-ending injury a year ago, he tallied 89 yards, which he's only done 4 other times in the orange and white. A year ago, he did it once. He had 94 yards against Florida. The year prior, in 2022, he did it 3 times, where all of those went for at least 102 yards or more. So I do think it's safe to say that he does feel like he is 100% back, and it was nice to actually see him performing like he is at 100%. I mean, he even carried the ball one time for 9 yards. So I definitely think that was very obvious. And I think the greatest asset that Bru McCoy brings is that he really is a physical wide receiver. He put up tons of key blocks a year ago. I think he'll do that again this year, which also lends himself to being able to get those contested catches as well. So I'll be excited to see, those, man-on-man, 50-50 balls come Bru McCoy's way, either Saturday or later this season. But what I thought was really cool for Bru McCoy is that even though the coaches say they weren't surprised by what he did on Saturday, they still say he was in rare air, which I think is a really cool thing to say. The third wide receiver that I think will be a problem for NC State and hopefully for the remaining of the season is newcomer Brazzle, who all of the hype and talk and chatter around him kind of reminds me of the same hype and talk and chatter that Dante Thornton had a year ago. But this time, for Brazzle, he made an instant impact on the field, whether making catches in the middle of the field in open space or even up against the sideline like he did early in the game and in the first drive for Tennessee against Chattanooga. And I think the reason that he was able to make such an immediate impact is because the coaches say he's always in the film room. He is always studying, which seems to really be the trend of this Tennessee football team, where all of them have taken it upon themselves to study beyond just, the scheduled film study with their position groups. They do it on their own all the time, and I think that was really obvious in their, massively lopsided win against Chattanooga, and I think that's why Chris Brazzle continues to practice and play with so much confidence, because he is taking it upon himself to study so much. And again, I think him being, a wide receiver that can be all over the field gives Tennessee a really nice advantage, because you don't see that all the time. We kind of just talked about it with, Dante Thornton, but I think Chris Brazzle is somebody who really could play all over the field, and you certainly need that when you're going up against, a secondary in NC State that really isn't too shabby, but when you have a variety of different types of wide receivers, that secondary will get exploited at some point, and I think Tennessee will keep feeding that receiver until NC State stops the bleeding. But I think another wide receiver that could cause damage, or that we see a bit more of, has to be Squirrel White. A year ago, he didn't have too many receptions, but had a lot of hype around him. He was that receiver that you could get to deep down the field. We talked about him in the offseason about getting that, opening drive touchdown against Alabama, and that was about as of a 50-50 ball contested catch that one could get, and he made it look easy. And he said it was in that aspect of his game that he feels that he's made the most growth since last season. Of course, he didn't really see that in week one. He didn't get his first target until the early plays of the second quarter, but that's also probably play design. Tennessee taking what Chattanooga was showing him and him being that speedy slot receiver. They didn't necessarily need to attack him there in that moment, but when his turn did come, he turned in 2 targets for 22 yards. But after the game, what impressed or stood out the most to the coaches was that even when he wasn't receiving those targets, he was still very effective in pass protection and when it came to blocking. And I think that kind of adds to, his statement where he feels he's made the most growth in, his physicality and in his strength. And it was obvious there. And it's, those types of plays that continue or will be most important as the season goes on. So for him to kind of be able to be a smaller Bru McCoy, where you are coming up with key blocks and you can get contested catches, that'll be big time this season. And it's certainly something Kelsey Pope really admired.
And if you watch Squirrel White and his tape from this weekend, it was his best game by far of him blocking on the perimeter. It didn't matter if we were at the 50-yard line, we were on the plus 2-yard line going in, and he's being violent and he's playing hard in the run game. Chaz was the exact same way. So both of those guys did a tremendous job. And for me as a coach, those things are probably more fulfilling than the touchdown catches, because you don't see it. There's no applause. Nobody even notices it. It's a character thing.
And who knows, maybe we see Squirrel White involved in the game earlier in week 2 than we did in week 1. Maybe getting that classic deep route that we've come so accustomed to seeing Squirrel White dominate, like the opening drive of the Alabama game a year ago, where you really could not have had more of a contested catch. All of this to bring me back to my initial point with Nico Iamaleava passing for 314 yards in the opening half of the game against Chattanooga, getting to, 7 different wide receivers, or 7 different receivers, 2 of those obviously being running back Dylan Sampson and tight end Ethan Davis getting a couple of receptions. But, with the 5 or so true receivers that Nico was able to get with, I think it really highlights just how deep that room is, how committed Tennessee really is to rotating its receivers. And with that talent, it's continued to make that receiving room even more lethal. And it's created a lot of trust and chemistry within the room.
I think they truly love each other, man. Right? It's easy to go celebrate for a guy I really care about. Like, when I know his family, I know what he's been through. You know what I mean? Like, it's easy to go celebrate with a guy who I've been in the trenches with, I've sweated with, I've sacrificed with. Like, it makes it really easy. Even if I want personal success, man, I got to go help that guy celebrate. And I think that's what you're seeing on the outside. But they all want the ball, which I want them to want the ball. We got to understand that, man, some days it's going to be my day. And if it's not, I got to go affect the game in a different way. I got to go add value some type of way.
Also, if you're enjoying the content, make sure to subscribe. But as much as we talk about Tennessee's talent, NC State has a little bit of that as well. And we talked about that at length earlier in the week. So, again, subscribe if you missed those conversations. But of course, it starts with wide receiver Kevin Concepcion. You have the running back Jordan Waters, who could create some mismatches for Tennessee's defense. One mismatch that really could happen is with their tight end, Justin Jolie, who played for UConn a year ago. I'm sure some Tennessee fans remember him when they took on Tennessee inside Neyland Stadium a year ago. But I think maybe those three guys are definitely a couple of people that Tennessee will keep their eyes on. But I also think they have the talent between Bru Carter, Gerard McCoy, James Pierce Jr., and Keelan Peely to really shut those guys down. So actually maybe we see Grayson McCall running a bit more, and he really hasn't had to use his legs at length until or since his 2022 season. But it is guys like Gerard McCoy who saw limited snaps in week one, but showed a lot of promise in that game, and is someone Tennessee will really rely on when it comes to NC State trying to stretch the field on Saturday.
I saw a guy that his experience showed up, at situations. We had obviously a defensive call down in the red zone where he was very aware of what he was getting based off the base of the call, and he knew what to anticipate. What kind of route the receiver was playing, the experience, the little things that he's got great field awareness, and his experience showed up in that moment and in some other plays too.
But at the end of the day, it's going to be the depth of Tennessee's wide receiving room. You looked at NC State's week one win against Western Carolina. Western Carolina was able to get 241 passing yards as compared to 140 rushing yards against the Wolfpack. I think Tennessee will definitely try and take advantage of that from, one, their up-tempo offense, the amount of times they went no huddle against Chattanooga. I think they'll continue that against NC State. Also, there's a lot of social media beef between the two fan bases. NC State with really odd hype videos, kind of disparaging some Tennessee players, which I thought was interesting. And I also haven't been able to corroborate whether or not the NC State has really bought more tickets than Tennessee. But I think regardless, ball fans will probably be louder. But if you guys have more information on that, I definitely would like to know, because the beef is so random and definitely seems to be instigated by NC State. Following the game, though, I'll have a post-game report that'll air, Sunday around 8 in the morning. So make sure you subscribe so you guys don't miss out on that. But thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and I'll chat with you guys on Sunday.